Greetings and welcome to episode 17 of Ending the Sexual Dark Age. I'm JV Altheros, and this week's show covers the basics of BDSM. This is a far-reaching and complex subject, and I won't even attempt to cover all of it in a single show. But we've got to start somewhere. Moving forward, I'll be covering a lot of different kinks and practical aspects thereof, but before we can get into all that, I need to explain some of the basics, and especially the philosophies, to provide a basis for understanding the more specific stuff later. Even so, this is going to be a long-ass episode. If you feel the need for a blowjob or muff diving break around the middle, have at it. There are a few points I'm going to hammer on a bit, but only because they represent the biggest misconceptions and stumbling blocks for the adventurous. I told you once before that I was tying women up before I was getting their clothes off. BDSM is a subject near and dear to my heart for a lot of reasons. There's an opportunity within kink for adventurous exploration of whatever twisted desires might float your boat. And by following some commonly accepted safety practices of BDSM, you can do so without significant risk of physical or emotional injury. BDSM isn't violence, and it isn't abuse. It's consensual, intimate play that's a living, breathing, flesh and blood fantasy. It's a framework and philosophy within which you can safely experience your most primal fantasies, your most visceral desires, and help your playmate experience theirs, all the while developing a bond of trust and unity that just isn't possible with vanilla sex. Submission is a celebration of free will and the search for emotional and sexual release by freely giving up control to someone you trust. For anyone not familiar with the term, vanilla is how kinky people view regular old pick-hole insert cock type sex play. Now I've had some vanilla ice cream that was awesome, but most of us like to add some toppings to even the best vanilla ice cream. No matter how good it is, there's only so much vanilla that anybody can handle. We like to dress up our vanilla ice cream with some toppings and turn it into what we really want to have for dessert. Kinksters view sex in much the same way. Let's face it. There are only so many ways, and so many places, and so many positions in which to insert tab A into slot B while still keeping things interesting. Even if the emotional bond is deep, and the sex is great, life takes a long fucking time to live. No matter how good it might be, vanilla sex is still two-dimensional. And I personally believe that society's profound opposition to sexual exploration is one of the key reasons so many people lose interest in sex later in life, and especially later in marriage. When society has you locked into a very narrow framework of what is acceptable, and you're not seeing past the sexual dark age, there's an opportunity to get bored, no matter how good it is. Any amount of kinky play adds an entire third dimension to sex and increases the possibilities by several orders of magnitude. BDSM is like standing there at the sundae bar with a big bowl of ice cream and 100 different toppings you can use in whatever amounts you want. Again and again, I've heard people say that they were interested in BDSM, but that it would have to be tailored to what they're comfortable with. That represents a big disconnect between actual kinky play and the popular consciousness, thanks to the sexual dark age. There's this permeating misconception that somehow there's a universal code of kinkiness, and that if you decide you want to try BDSM, then you're blindly signing up for all kinds of shit. Not so. That's your fucking bowl of ice cream. And if you don't want chocolate sprinkles, nobody's going to force you to take them. You can have some tomorrow if you change your mind. All kinky play is tailored to the desires and comfort zones of the players. You're never signing up for anything more than you explicitly ask for. When it's being done right, BDSM is the epitome of safe yet boundless exploration of whatever twisted fantasies you might have, and the philosophies revolve around nurture, trust, and tolerance. It's like having your own fucking holodeck. The most important thing to remember, and I'll repeat this several times over the course of the show, is that the submissive always retains the right to say stop. All that said, BDSM certainly is not for everyone, but the principles and philosophies of BDSM are the principles of great sex, whether you ever choose to get kinky or not. And this episode will shine a lot of light on that particular statement. BDSM demands honest, open communication between playmates. It demands honest discussion after play to see what worked and what didn't. It allows anyone to try something new and see if they like it, as well as the freedom to turn around if they find something they don't like. As a result of all of this, sexually adventurous people are quite naturally already being drawn to kink. As with many aspects of the sexual dark age, BDSM is amazingly misunderstood. Because we get no practical education on matters of sexuality, like so many other topics, we get most of our information from porn and various other types of media. None of that shit is remotely educational or kink positive. Fuck, it's not even sex positive. And usually, if kink is mentioned at all, it's only being done for the shock value. You know what I mean. Some cop show opens up an armoire at a crime scene to find some kinky toy chest. Then they spend an hour investigating just what a filthy pervert the victim was. Meanwhile, I'm wondering if they shop at the same leather workers I do, and I'm rewinding it to get a better look at the toy chest. It's very rare to see kink portrayed in a positive light anywhere in the media, and that just adds to the sense that kinksters are all dirty perverts who shun the light of day and spend all their time spanking each other. We're not. We're your banker, your doctor, your plumber, and the girl at the coffee shop. We're everyday people who happen to want our sex to be as three-dimensional as the rest of our lives, and we're everywhere. Everybody you know is more kinky than you think they are. Maybe just a little, maybe a lot, but usually more. Your mom just might like the occasional spanking, and your sister just might like being hog-tied and fucked in the mouth. And if either of those two things happens to be true, then I say good for them, because they're just choosing to explore perfectly natural desires. As a society, we're still laboring under prevailing attitudes towards sexuality that were literally forged in the European Dark Ages during the first millennium. This was a time with no technology to speak of, little more than the church to enforce order, abject poverty for most people, and an average life expectancy of about 35 years. Yay, team! Most people were illiterate, lived in small villages, and spent their entire lives within a few miles of where they were born. Fast forward to 2011. Our concept of the world is actually global. We have the ability to carry 2 weeks' worth of music on something the size of a credit card. Hundreds of channels of entertainment and input on our televisions, and the internet, for fuck's sake.
Condition, stimulus, overload.
Consider for a moment how much more complex our lives have become, how much more we understand about the world we live in, and the sheer amount of intellectual input we're exposed to as compared to those dark age primitives whose sexuality we're supposed to embrace. Contrast is more than a little fucking staggering. Of course, plain vanilla, missionary only with the lights out sex is not enough for most of us. How the fuck could it be? We want more from life than possibly any previous society on the planet. How could we not want more from our sex than dirt poor, illiterate farmers who literally believed if they didn't pray every night the sun wouldn't come up tomorrow to warm their crops? Kinky's the new normal, folks, though it's usually behind closed doors, and there's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to wear kink on your sleeve unless that's the fashion statement you want to make, but there's no reason not to explore it in private to whatever extent you might be interested. A desire to add some flavor to your sex isn't just okay. It's predictable, it's perfectly natural, and it doesn't reflect negatively on you in any way. In fact, kinksters tend to be some of the most open, accepting, least bigoted people on the planet. Once you've come face to face with your own filthy mind, whether you act on your desires or not, it becomes a whole lot more difficult to shun other people for whatever turns them on, or where they're from, or the color of their skin, or really fucking whatever. It's not like you're gonna walk into a fetish club and, some guy's gonna say, oh yeah, well, I like to get double anal from, 2 girls with strap-ons, but that guy's a pervert. No, it's just not gonna happen. There are a lot of acronyms and arcane terminology in the realm of kinky sex, and we'll get to all the important ones eventually. I'll start by explaining what the acronym BDSM means and where it comes from. As part of language and culture, the term BDSM is fairly new on the scene. Most sources trace it back to the early 90s and the infancy of the internet and the first kinky Usenet groups. Those of you old enough to join me in remembering those early days of the internet can join me in a private chuckle at how far it's come in 20 years. What we consider to be the modern culture of BDSM dates back to just after World War II, when returning gay soldiers started the Leather Boy movement. Yes, Virginia, there have always been gays in the military. Modern society became progressively more sexually explorative in the ensuing decades, but most of it was relegated to back rooms, basements, and private fetish clubs when it came to the BDSM scene. Even the so-called sexual revolution of the late 60s was still a pretty vanilla affair. The internet was like the spark that hit the haystack, because all of a sudden people could start exploring their desires with true anonymity safely behind their computer screens. If you wanted to check out some kinky porn, you no longer had to visit a sex shop and pay a browsing fee to a guy in a stained wife-beater t-shirt before checking out the magazines. As a result, interest in and access to information about kinky sex has increased exponentially. The term BDSM is a compound acronym that covers a lot of ground. It's kind of like a very broad umbrella that covers any aspect of kinky play, whether sex is involved or not. In BDSM, the BD stands for Bondage and Discipline, the DS for Dominance and Submission, and the SM for Sadism and Masochism, or, as I prefer for reasons I'll explain in a bit, Sadomasochism. There's a lot of overlap there, and a lot of gray area, and that's the reason so many people can easily identify with the term. There's a complicated mishmash of roles, practices, equipment, and whatnot, and there's no reason for you to try to get your brain around all of it at once. If you tried, you might end up pulling a Johnny Mnemonic anyway. Virtually any kind of kinky play, from play piercing to candle wax, to foot fetishes, to handcuffs, to pony play, to just liking a little spanking once in a while, all falls under the purview of BDSM. It's kind of a flag of unity that any kinkster can comfortably fly if they choose. It's a one-size-fits-all identifier for a no-size-fits-all lifestyle. The term also covers everyone from those who lead perfectly vanilla lives and just like a little slap and tickle in the bedroom to those who practice the total power exchange of a 24/7 master-slave relationship. And the BDSM community, such as you may find it, is welcoming of the entire spectrum. So I'll take a moment to go over the components of the term BDSM. Well, probably several moments, actually. But I'll remind you that there's a lot of overlap between one letter and the next. An important factor to remember here is that BDSM, as a whole, across the entire spectrum, is a take what you want and leave the rest type activity. There are people in dom-sub relationships who don't do any pain play at all. There are people into spankings who can't handle being tied up. In fact, there are people into spankings who aren't into much else at all. No matter how much you might or might not choose to experiment, you're just standing there with a bowl of ice cream in front of 100 different ways to add some flavor. I said a minute ago that no size fits all, and that's a key point as well. Every one of us experiences life and sexuality differently. So naturally, everyone has a different range of interests in the realm of BDSM, just like they do in vanilla sex. That's okay, it's perfectly natural, and even the most dedicated deviant, such as myself, would never suggest that you go farther down the rabbit hole than you're comfortable with. BDSM is all about enthusiastic exploration with the absolute right to change your mind. Now, to actually get to the acronym, B&D, bondage is the art of using physical restraints as a part of sex play. This is almost universally accompanied by the submission of the person in the restraints, to one extent or another. The term bondage covers everything from handcuffs to full suspension to caging, pretty much anything, any fashion in which you might restrain somebody or restrain some part of their body to something or some other part of their body or some other person or, however you might like to roll. It is the most gear-intensive aspect of BDSM since there is such a wide variety of flavors of restraints, and it also needs to be practiced with discretion to avoid physical injury. A little bruising and soreness after play is one thing, if the submissive is up for it, but no BDSM play should ever result in a need for medical attention. Bondage is also a trust exercise that represents fundamental power exchange. Being bound is an act of surrender to the will of the dominant, trusting entirely in their discretion, judgment, skill, and protection. Above all, there's the trust that if you say stop, the dominant will stop. And when I say protection, I mean protection. If you got a submissive bound up and the incredible fucking Hulk comes through the wall, you better be standing between that submissive and that Hulk, because that's the job you signed up for as a dominant. Even when being tied up comes naturally to someone, the act is a fundamental show of trust. If you're playing the part of the dominant, you cannot, under any circumstances, violate that trust. Discipline is the practice of having a dominant making rules for a submissive to follow, then punishing the submissive if the rules are broken. This can be a short-term rule, like kneel in this position until you're told otherwise. Some people like to bring their dominant and submissive roles outside their sex play as well, so a rule might be something vanilla that must be done on a daily or a weekly basis. Many kinksters keep all their BDSM behind closed doors, not allowing it to impact everyday life. I'd venture to say that most kinky people fall into that category. While fetish clubs and group play parties are a great time for those who choose to go that route, the fact is most people prefer to keep their sex play private, whether it's kinky play or not. Bringing kink out of the playroom and into your daily life is a transition from playtime BDSM to lifestyle BDSM, even if nobody knows about it but you and your playmate. And you generally only find rules about daily tasks and such in lifestyle relationships, but I can give you an easy example. When Shara arrives at my place, one of her first tasks is to bring me her collar so that I can put it around her neck. If she's only going to be here for a little while, I might give her a pass on that, but it's her responsibility to ask if she can forego the collar. When she brings the collar, she kneels, bows her head, and lifts her hair out of the way so I'm not inconvenienced when I'm putting the collar on. Then she gives me a kiss and thanks me. BDSM can be full of little rituals, and you'll find more of them in lifestyle relationships. If you're doing playtime BDSM, a collar ritual is actually a great way to get everyone in the right headspace for some kinky fun. It's like an official assumption of your role as a dominant or submissive. In lifestyle BDSM, it's more of a reinforcement of the role you've chosen to evoke every day, but it does serve the same basic purpose. Little rules and rituals add structure and depth to any amount of BDSM play. When a rule is broken, that's when it's time for discipline, and it's the dominant's responsibility to invoke some sort of punishment. Punishment doesn't need to be something physical either. In fact, if you get into sadomasochistic play, there are good arguments against physical punishment, especially when you're a little bit new to the play. If a submissive enjoys being spanked or flogged or whatever, it doesn't make much sense to use something she enjoys as punishment. You're working against yourself at that point, sending mixed signals. Does she get that when she's good, or does she get it when she's bad? You're just creating confusion where there's no need to. It's possible to use good pain during play and bad pain for punishment, but that's a difficult line to walk. Likewise, if a sub enjoys humiliation, verbal discipline will be a tough distinction to make effectively. For those interested in doing their first experimentation, it's a safer route to keep methods of punishment separate from whatever you're doing for pleasure. I don't have to punish Shara very often, but when I do, the most effective method is to make her kneel facing a wall with her nose touching the wall for a situationally appropriate period of time. She absolutely hates this, so I reserve it for important stuff, and I promise to have her talk about it later. For purposes of playtime BDSM, discipline can also be nothing more than part of some enthusiastic roleplay, such as a maid caught going through her employer's closet and being punished or used sexually for her indiscretions. That dirty little girl. Or the age-old scenario of a cheating student being punished by the teacher. Above and beyond all else, kink is a means by which you can live out fantasies in a safe, nurturing environment. On to the second part of the acronym, DS, or Dominance and Submission. Dominance and submission are convolutedly simple concepts, and if you're wondering if convolutedly is a word, it is now. In a dom-sub relationship or play scene, one person submits to the will of the other, ostensibly to have all sorts of deliciously filthy things done to them. The broad term for this is power exchange. The submissive relinquishes their power to the dominant, submitting to the dominant's will and use. Submission is a gift, and is the responsibility of the dominant to be worthy of that gift by giving trust and protection from harm in exchange. Whether it's nature, nurture, or more likely a combination of the two, men are overwhelmingly more likely to identify as dominant and women submissive. As far as demographics go, the rarest creature in all the scene is the female dominant, with the second rarest being the male submissive. Between bi and lesbian female submissives and male subs, a female dom has got a lot of options. There's a misconception in the mainstream consciousness that submission is a sign of weakness, but in BDSM it is a respected and revered path. And there is far more reward in accepting the submission of the strong. And in healthy BDSM play, one of the dominant's roles is to nurture the sub and help them explore their own inner strength by embracing the visceral impulse to submit to the will of another. Female submissives actually get an escape hatch from some dark age dogma that says it's bad to be a slut, and only slutty women like sex. Former playmate of mine used to say that all the filthy things she did with me were my fault, because she was my property when she was wearing my collar, and she was just following orders. I've always thought that was an elegant way to look at submission, so now I share the thought with all you filthy girls out there. I believe I can speak for the entire guild when I say that dominants are happy to take the blame, and absolve you of any responsibility for all the slutty things that you don't want to admit you enjoy. Because even though you had to agree to take our commands in the first place, yeah, we did make you do it. And we liked it. And if you liked it, we're going to either make you admit it, or make you blush and giggle in confession, which is Shara's favorite maneuver. Just to make things just a little more complicated, there are 3 general tiers of dominance and submission, loosely viewed as master-slave, dominant-submissive, and top-bottom. Those who keep all their DS tendencies restricted to sex play are generally viewed as tops and bottoms. There are plenty of people who like some flavor to their sex, but don't let those proclivities extend beyond sex play. My personal experience leads me to believe that this covers the majority of freaks and freakettes out there, casual kinksters who like some spice but don't take it too seriously. A top might like giving spankings, pulling some hair, and tying someone up, but not have any desire to be in charge of the relationship or wield any significant influence over their playmate outside the bedroom. By the same token, the stereotypical business executive who pays a dominatrix for a weekly session of humiliation would be a bottom, but not necessarily a submissive. Likewise, someone who submits to their playmate sexually, but only sexually, is more of a bottom than a classical submissive. Those falling under the classical concepts of dom and sub tend to make these tendencies more a significant part of their personal relationships than those who restrict them to sex play. And at the far end of the spectrum is the master-slave dynamic. This is known as total power exchange, but don't let the word total throw you. As with all BDSM, there are a lot of different ways this comes together based on the players. In total power exchange, the master's ownership of the slave becomes the core of the relationship, instead of an aspect of the relationship. In the most extreme cases, slaves give up all control over their finances and property, but that's a minute segment of the community. In a master-slave relationship, the slave submits in all aspects of life. Now, that doesn't mean the master has to control every aspect of the slave's life. I mean, fuck. I can't even imagine micromanaging Shara from 1 minute to the next on everything. I'd lose my fucking mind. But I could if I chose to. It's not about actually taking total control. It's about having control of anything that's actually important to me. Submissives suited to be slaves derive an especially profound pleasure from serving the needs of their dominant. So that's the core of the master-slave dynamic. The slave is subject to the master's will at any time, subject to the general reasonableness and realities of living in a civilized society where people need to have jobs and care for kids and shit. I reserve the right to call Shara in the middle of the night and command her to get out of bed, drive over to my place, and blow me. And she'd do it. Actually, she has. Not recently, but yeah, she has. And she liked it. She loves to please me in the first place. Spontaneous shit like that makes a submissive feel amazingly desired, and I can have a blowjob whenever I want. Win, win, win. Some master-slave relationships are formalized by slave contracts, which specify in detail the rights and responsibilities of each party in the relationship. Often slave contracts have expiration dates, which allow the contract to be revised before being extended. Bear in mind, slave contracts have absolutely zero legal value. I mean, a reasonable person would assume that. But every once in a while, some asshat locks his wife in a closet for 2 weeks, then waves around a slave contract in court. And those fucking idiots bring darkness to all of our doorsteps. Jackassery of that nature is in no way condoned by the guild. So no, a slave contract is no more than it seems to be. It's simply a way for people to sit down and actually negotiate the terms and duration of their relationship in a very detailed fashion. It can have clauses that apply to life in general or just the sexual part of the relationship. It can be whatever the players want it to be, but the act of putting it all down on paper is actually pretty liberating, especially in a world where people are increasingly more hesitant to define relationships. As I said earlier, total power exchange is certainly not the norm. It's the far end of the kinky spectrum. And even in a 24/7 master-slave relationship, all the simple principles of maintaining health and safety apply. Even slaves still have limits, and they still have the right to say stop. Also, you don't have to dive headfirst into total power exchange to have a hell of a lot of fun with the master-slave dynamic as a role-playing device. I've always had a policy that anyone wearing one of my collars is my slave for the duration. And of course, I warn any woman about that before she puts one of my collars on. I am an honorable lech, after all. If she asks me to remove the collar, I'll remove it. But while she's wearing it, she is mine to do with as I will. Even if it's just during your kinky playtime, collars are very symbolic of submission, and thus symbolic of BDSM as a whole. Going out and picking up a collar and adding a policy like mine to your own kinky play will allow you to have a tangible beginning and end to play when the collar is going on or coming off, and it will probably allow you to be a little more adventurous since you're drawing a bright line between playtime and the rest of life. A lot of hesitation with BDSM is the result of people thinking that, somehow it's going to spin out of control or it's going to permeate every aspect of their life. No, it doesn't have to. It's your fucking bowl of ice cream. But when the collar comes off at the end of playtime, it's time to go back to the business of day-to-day life, allowing play to be even more of a fantasy world. To echo what I said a few minutes ago, submission is a gift. Accepting it is a sacred responsibility. The cardinal duty of any dominant is to protect the health and safety of the submissive. In a DS relationship, the submissive surrenders a large measure of free will in exchange for having their carnal desires mapped out by trial and error. And I do enjoy cartography. While the submissive is the one surrendering and taking orders, the dominant's job is actually more complex and demanding. Actually, just this week, a switch friend of mine said that he's been playing around with being a dom, but that it's way too much fucking work and he'd rather just sub. The dom has to devise scenarios for play that entertain everyone while working within the submissive's limits, simultaneously pushing those limits, never letting an eye wander from safety concerns, pushing the submissive to have honest conversations before and after play, and also procuring and utilizing a fairly vast array of gear and toys. You also have to accomplish all that within the framework of what you enjoy. It's a lot of fucking work being a dominant, so if you're leaning in that direction, know that up front. Still, and I say this with absolute sincerity, having access to a naked woman who calls me master and does literally whatever filthy thing I can imagine, well, that makes it all worthwhile. Yep, all of it, every bit. In the spectrum of dominance and submission, we also have switches, people who are dominant sometimes and submissive at other times. I've known several female switches who sub to men in their primary relationship and like to pick up the flogger for casual play, and some who were the doms in their primary relationships and like to submit, but not to their primary submissive. I've also known a large share of male switches who prefer to sub, but due to the lack of available female dominance, they end up taking on the dominant role more often just so they can get some kind of kinky play. This is one more illustration of the lifestyle being accepting of whatever role you want to evoke, and a lot of switches have very specific preferences. And it's not uncommon for someone to have some switch tendencies as a simple result of life being a spectrum of color and not black and white. But most people in the scene only identify with one end or the other in practice. This brings us to the third part of the BDSM acronym, S&M, or Sadomasochism. The terms sadism and masochism were first coined by the 19th century Austrian psychiatrist named, Richard Freiherr von Krafft-Ebing. I fucking think. The term sadism is derived from Marquis DuSade. Marquis being a title in the rolls of French nobility and Sade being a place in France. So contrary to colloquial wisdom, Marquis DuSade was not actually his name, it was his title. Many people held that title over the decades and centuries, but the famous Marquis DuSade was actually named, and here's another great name I'll probably murder, Donatien Alphonse François, who lived from 1740 to 1814. Popular culture has pretty much mythologized DuSade over the centuries and turned him into some spooky figure who gave birth to modern BDSM. Nope, that was the gay soldiers coming back from World War II. In reality, DuSade was a politician, aristocrat, and prolific writer who also happened to be an outspoken opponent of the Catholic Church and a shameless lech. Not an honorable lech like people you might find around here. He lived at the bleeding edge of the libertine philosophy of the time, rejecting all concepts of morality, and was repeatedly arrested and imprisoned for both political and sexual escapades. Many of his works were actually written in prison, and many scholars believe that his infamy and extreme interpretations of libertine philosophy caused the downfall of the original libertine movement. In any case, DuSade's sexual escapades were rather legendary in his day, but his erotic writings were an order of magnitude more extreme, carefully designed to both shock and appall the French nobility and the church, while titillating everyone else, and he succeeded. Most of his erotic works are still in print from many publishing houses in various forms, but I have to say I've honestly never particularly enjoyed them. This is partially due to the archaic language giving me kind of a headache. But in my opinion, he should have spent a little more time on characters and storyline and less time on shocking the Catholics. There's lots of blood and beatings and ass fuckings, but not a tremendous amount of compelling storytelling as we know it today. Anyway, the term sadist loosely refers to a person who is gratified by inflicting suffering or pain on others. The term masochist was also coined by Krafft-Ebing, whatever. And masochist is derived from the name of another 19th century author who had a particular affinity for dominant women wearing fur. The term refers to those who are gratified by having pain inflicted on them. Also important to note, in both the original and modern definitions of these terms, a sexual component isn't required, and both terms have changed in meaning several times over the years. This is where the term S&M kind of breaks down in relation to BDSM, because very few kinksters are actual sadists. A textbook sadist enjoys inflicting pain, period. There's no implied component of a willing playmate. This isn't the case in BDSM, and I think it's one reason the various kinky communities embraced BDSM as a flag to fly, trying to shed their association with the rather heavy psychiatric connotations of sadism and masochism. I prefer to say that I am a sadomasochist, another term whose definition has changed a lot over the years. I officially reclaim the term to describe myself, and I invite you to do the same if you have similar tendencies. See, I don't enjoy inflicting pain for the sake of pain. Most other dominants don't either. I'm not really a sadist in the pure sense of the word, because I only enjoy inflicting pain when that pain is giving pleasure to my playmate. I'm not a sadist unless I'm playing with a masochist. Thus, in the name of ending the sexual dark age, I officially lay claim to the term sadomasochist. Historically, psychologists used sadomasochist to describe people who displayed the traits of both sadists and masochists, but we already have a name for them, switches. So rah-rah, fuck the establishment, I'm taking sadomasochist. At this point, you might be wondering, and you might have very genuine curiosity, why some people derive pleasure from pain. It's a complicated explanation with a somewhat simple Cliff's Notes version, which I will do my best to explain here. When it comes down to it, pain and pleasure are both handled by the same parts of the brain. They're both fundamental primal responses to stimulation, and they're very much like two sides of a coin. Both are sensed by the same nervous system, and the difference is largely in the way the brain interprets the information it's receiving. Pleasure causes an endorphin response, brain chemicals that produce a natural state of well-being and peace. Pain causes more of an adrenaline response, heightened sensitivity, blood pressure, heart rate, etc. Pain impulses also cause changes in the nature of the flesh, such as blood flowing into a paddled ass and making it nice and rosy. And those changes modify how the flesh responds to stimulation and how the brain perceives pleasure. Think of it like preparing a canvas before actually painting a picture. For example, gentle, cool breath and the absolute slightest touch of your fingertips on an ass that's been thoroughly spanked and reddened will get you a much, much more intense response on the pleasure end of the spectrum than what you could have gotten with the same stimulation and no spanking. Pain impulses make flesh hypersensitive, and when they're followed up by pleasure impulses, you're in a whole new realm of possibilities. When you get really good at reading your playmate and using just the right amount of pain in conjunction with just the right amount of pleasure, you can produce sensations that literally are not physically possible in the realm of vanilla sex, and orgasms that are off the fucking chart. In the right hands, and assuming you're playing with a sub who enjoys at least a little pain, which in my experience would be most of them, pain can become a tool of pleasure just like a tongue, cock, or vibrator. Right now, you're probably getting a sense for how totally fucking confabulated all of this actually is. If you are, that's actually good. It means you're paying attention and you're picking up what I'm laying down. It is kind of a jumbled collection of concepts and practices, but nobody expects anybody to make sense of it all at once. And this is me trying to cover just the bare bones so we can talk intelligently about the more advanced stuff later. And I'll remind you again about the Sunday bar. Take as much as you want of whatever's out there and leave the rest. Just try to keep your mind open to flavor combinations you haven't tried yet. Moving on to how we know when enough is enough, I mentioned soft and hard limits in one of the recent listener mail episodes, and I want to go into the concept a little more deeply here. The word limits is thrown around a lot in BDSM, and in a general sense, the term simply means the limits of what types of play are acceptable to you. Limits can be a fluid thing as you proceed to explore your kinky side, and that's okay. In fact, that's the way it's supposed to work. If you get a little adventurous, you won't end up liking everything you try, so you'll need to define new limits along the way. Nope, not gonna do that again. No more vacuum cleaners up the ass. For a lot of submissives, spanking is an excellent example of a soft limit. Many subs enjoy being spanked, but obviously there is a limit to how hard or how long or what kinds of toys might be involved. I've known subs who loved floggers, but not paddles or open hand spankings. I've known others who couldn't stand floggers, but hit him in the ass with anything else you got. Car door, fuck, whatever. So in this example, spanking would generally have some soft limits involved. A common hard limit is found in water sports. Most of us have absolutely no desire to be pissed on or to piss on somebody else. That makes water sports a hard limit for many, many people. A lot of the mystery and spontaneity of kinky play revolves around the dominant's understanding of the sub's limits and the dom's ability to creatively work inside them. Remember, BDSM is fantasy in motion, and the more thoroughly you can evoke the roles of the dominant and submissive, the more rewarding that fantasy will be. Once a dominant has a thorough understanding of how far a submissive likes to get pushed, he can do some pretty extreme stuff in the course of play without ever getting near her limits. No worthy dominant would ever intentionally push a submissive into a hard limit or past a soft limit. Even when you're playing with whips and chains, the goal is still to play nice and make sure everyone finishes the scene with a big shit-eating grin on their face. And this is where totally open communication is absolutely mandatory. After any kinky play session, the sooner the better, you need to discuss the scene to find out what worked and what didn't. If you pushed a soft limit, you may find that the sub wants to push it a little farther next time. You may discover you found a new hard limit. You may have tried something new out of your own creative resources that your playmate really wants to explore further, but you'll never know any of this shit without totally honest communication. This is one place where BDSM and the general principles of great sex have 100% common ground. You should be doing the communication thing regardless of your level of kink, but you simply can't do BDSM safely and in a rewarding fashion without it. I've said several times already that the submissive always retains the right to say stop. This is probably the single most fundamental principle of healthy BDSM, because it's the submissive's absolute protection from harm. The healthy, safe practice of kink revolves around the concept of informed consent, which can be revoked at any time by any party. The mechanism used by responsible kinksters is called a safe word. All healthy BDSM play involves safe words for the submissives. It can be any word or phrase that the submissive will be able to remember in any situation, but it should always be something that won't normally be said during the course of playtime. For a ludicrous example, fuck me harder would be a terrible safe word. As would, oh yeah, spank that ass, baby. That would be terrible for a safe word. There's a generally accepted traffic light system that works very well for newbies and experienced players alike. I encourage it simply because it uses imagery that's ingrained into the Western consciousness already, and also provides a sub with a way to say this is almost my limit. In the traffic light system, as you might imagine, green means all good, which means in practicality you'll never hear it out loud. Yellow means proceed with caution, and red means stop. The artful dominant will find boundaries and limits, and then do a little dance on the line without ever going over it. And as a dom, I feel like I have failed if I hear a safe word. To me, it means I wasn't effectively reading the submissive's reactions, and that my own perspective needs an adjustment. If you're interested in exploring kink for the first time, I strongly suggest that you use the traffic light safe word system, and I damn near insist that fledgling submissives make good use of yellow. No artful dominant ever wants to hear red, but being told we're almost at a limit is the information that we can really work with. That's where we're almost a yellow. Yeah, maybe a couple more hits with that flogger. That is where the rubber meets the road when it comes to figuring out what a submissive likes. In situations where a submissive may be gagged or otherwise unable to speak a safe word, you need a backup plan. Good options include having the sub hold on to something that they can drop if they're in distress. That could be anything, really, but I prefer something that will make some noise when it hits the floor. A submissive could also hum a particular song or shake their hands violently. Exactly what doesn't matter so much as making sure it's something the dom will notice and understand, and that it's something that's been set up before play begins. Ironically, the biggest pitfall of safe words is the reluctance of submissives to use them. In some circumstances, subs can start to feel like they're failing the dominant somehow if they can't just take whatever he's dishing out. And that's something every submissive really needs to come to terms with and get over. It is a natural tendency. It is the natural tendency of a submissive to want to please the dominant, and the brain can very easily make the connection that, you please him by taking whatever he's dishing out, but that's just not true. Your service and submission is a sacred trust accepted by the dominant, and the dom needs the absolute truth about what works for you and what doesn't. Just like in vanilla sex, you need to be able to say, this is too much for me. And preferably, this is almost too much for me. If you bite the bullet and take more than you want, if you're past your limit and ask for more, you're planting seeds of resentment in your relationship. Resentment and distrust that will absolutely fuck the relationship up in the long term. Still shopping in the health and safety department, I need to toss you a couple more acronyms that are safety philosophies, SSC and RAC. The first one, SSC, means safe, sane, and consensual. Of the two, it's the more conservative philosophy, but also the most appropriate for beginners. The general view of safe and sane in this instance is play conducted between trusted playmates when everyone involved is sober, aware of any relevant risks, and all foreseeable safety precautions have been taken. In the age of the internet, doing a little safety research before trying some new kind of bondage is as easy as going to Google, frugaldom.com, or any one of many websites devoted to BDSM safety. There will be a link to Frugal Dom in the show notes on sexualdarkage.com for this episode. SSC covers common safety concerns such as making sure safe words are always in place before play begins, avoiding any bondage position that might cause positional asphyxia. I'll get into this more deeply when I do the bondage episode, but the McNuggets version is that certain contorted positions can restrict movement of the diaphragm or compress the lungs, making breathing difficult or impossible. The rule of thumb is that if a bound submissive has any shortness of breath or breathing issues at all, they need to be released immediately, and that position goes on the no-no list. You also need to make sure you can release any bound submissive quickly and easily in the event of an emergency. Think house fire, or fuck, somebody just walked in the house. This means having a good pair of EMT scissors handy if you're playing with rope or tape or saran wrap, padlocks that are all key-to-like if you're using chains, etc. Basically, whatever you need to make sure you can get somebody out of whatever bondage you're using in no time flat. Also, never leave a bound person alone. This doesn't mean don't step out of the room to take a leak, but it does mean don't leave the house and don't be away for more than a couple of minutes. It also helps to ask the submissive if they're okay once in a while. Give them the opportunity to say an arm is starting to go a little bit numb or a restraint is a little bit too tight. Should also periodically be checking for cold or numb extremities and also for color change indicating a blood flow problem. Blue flesh means that blood flow is restricted, and purple means blood can get in but not out. This is especially important because wave after wave of adrenaline and endorphins and orgasms can push a sub into subspace, which is it's a mental zone of total comfortably numb. If there's a blood flow problem, the dominant might actually see it before the sub even realizes it's happening. Lastly, avoid alcohol and drugs. I want to spend a minute on this point because this is where some people get really fucking preachy. There are those who maintain that no safe BDSM play can be performed when any participant has had any amount of intoxicants. Case closed, no exceptions. I'm not a big fan of case closed and no exceptions. I would counter that point of view by saying that we are all fucking grown-ups. We all have to be able to use our own good judgment. If you've been tying one on all day, bondage is a bad idea. If you have any inclination that maybe you shouldn't be operating heavy equipment, you shouldn't be doing bondage or pain play. But to imply, like some do, that you've got to ban all manner of DS play just because of a little buzz is just insulting to the average person's intelligence. Be aware of the risks that you're taking and act accordingly. If you're hammered and horny, keep it vanilla for the evening. But I won't treat you like a fucking imbecile by implying that your judgment is incontrovertibly impaired by having a drink or two with dinner. The second common safety philosophy is called RAC, or Risk-Aware Consensual Kink. RAC is generally better left to more experienced players who have learned the ropes and made a newbie mistake or 5. It's a philosophy more in tune with people who enjoy edge play, such as extreme bondage, asphyxia, blood play, that sort of thing. There isn't any long-winded explanation here, just an understanding of the acronym, really. In RAC, all players are well informed of whatever risks and dangers are inherent in whatever play is going on. And in light of that knowledge, all players offer informed consent to engage in the aforementioned play. The general practices here for safety are mostly the same as SSC, but RAC play accepts the concept that there is always some amount of risk. RAC acknowledges that different people have different ideas of what is safe and sane, and focuses more on the informed consent and minimization of any risk. An essay by someone whose username is Danae, RAC versus SSC, sums this up nicely by saying, "There is no this is safe and this is not. There is only safer and less safe." That sounds a little Jedi, actually. That essay is worth the read for the adventurous, and I'll have a link to it in the show notes for this episode on sexualdarkage.com. To address another really common misconception about the lifestyle, and regardless of what Hollywood would like you to think, kink and group sex are not synonymous. There are indeed many polyamorous people involved in the BDSM lifestyle, but it's not the norm, even within BDSM. Polyamory life is far more accepted than it is in the vanilla world, and it does seem to be quite a bit more common, but most people in our society prefer monogamous relationships, and that's reflected in the BDSM community. This is another wide-ranging misconception regarding the kinky side of life, owing largely to how kink is portrayed in popular culture. Spankings and handcuffs are not some gateway drug that will lead you to the bottom of a pile of naked people. Willies everywhere. If you have those inclinations in the first place, you'll certainly find them easier to express within BDSM, but there's no cause and effect at play there. Remember what I said earlier about the scene attracting those who are sexually adventurous in the first place. People doing group BDSM play are the same ones who would be swinging in the vanilla world. This might be you, but it might not. But it is important to note that in the realm of BDSM, group play does not necessarily mean group sex. This is one of the more interesting gray areas that pops up when you embrace sexual exploration. Grab onto it with both hands. I have bound, spanked, and flogged plenty of women that I never had sex with, and a lot of experienced dominants could tell you the exact same thing. For a whole lot of people, kinky play is an end in itself, and it doesn't have to be followed up by an orgasm in order to feel worthwhile or fulfilling. For example, the best dungeon party I ever threw was in a hotel suite many years ago. Occasional playmate of mine dropped by with a little friend of hers who wanted to see what it felt like to be flogged. I, of course, was more than happy to assist, gentleman that I am. A proper flogging involves working with your hands, but I am always happy to keep it in my pants if that's what the circumstances call for, just like most doms experienced in group play. Kink is always intimate, but not always sexual. One of the gorgeous gray areas of kink is the opportunity for intimate but non-sexual experiences in groups. In any case, just like every other department in the store, you're welcome to reach for as much as you'd like and leave the rest. Of course, if you do want to try some group play, you're going to need some playmates. There's a bold, glaring line that exists between the BDSM lifestyle and the BDSM community. Plenty of people enjoy private kinky play without any desire to connect or network with other freaks and freakettes. For those who are interested in becoming part of a larger community, the first few steps can be a combination of intimidating and inscrutable. It's also a difficult option for people who live outside of major metropolitan areas. Any place with a decent amount of population density also has some kind of BDSM community. The simple hurdle is finding it, since kinksters don't tend to advertise on billboards. I'll do a little dance when that day arrives, but it is not today. Probably not tomorrow either. Still, there are options for connecting with other kinky people that have nothing to do with internet dating sites. The most low-key and approachable for people curious but not experienced are called munches. They're laid-back, informal gatherings that generally happen in a restaurant somewhere, and everyone is always welcome. Munches are an age-old networking tool in the BDSM community, and there will always be someone there acting as de facto host or den mother, introducing themselves to new people and trying to make newcomers feel welcome and, just basically get them to converse and mingle and, matriculate. Yes, that's the one. Munches are a totally casual environment where no play happens and everyone wears normal street clothes because you're just in a regular vanilla restaurant. They are not play parties, just a place where a lot of casual conversation happens to be about BDSM, and you can get to know some other kinky people in a zero-pressure situation, although in some cases there is a private invitation-only after-party. And if you're worried about seeing somebody you know there, well, that goes back to the principle of they were there too. Now on the upside, you've got something new to talk to your friend about. Discretion is an assumption in BDSM, since openly kinky people can face the same type of scorn that gays can here in this fucking sexual dark age. Actually, I'd like to take a moment to ask all the gays to throw us a fucking rope, because you guys are doing a hell of a lot better than we are these days. And if you do venture into the community, you should feel free to use an assumed name or a nickname when meeting people for the first time or going to munches or whatever. A lot of the people you meet are going to be doing the same thing, and nobody will mind a bit. If you're not ready to meet anyone in person, there are lots of message boards out there where you can find discussions on BDSM, and I'll try to drum up a list of those for you. Kinksters like to stick with formats that work, so, it actually tends to make us a little bit archaic as a culture. You can find a lot of regional kinky groups on Yahoo groups, which most of the internet is fairly well abandoned. Many of these groups are basically newsletters and munch and gathering announcement forums, but a lot of them have lively conversation as well. If you live in Chicago and you Google munches in Northern Illinois or something similar, on the first page of results, you should get some relevant Yahoo groups. If you try that and you're still having trouble, feel free to drop me an email with your location and I'll have Shara dig up some links for you. As an aside, anonymous free email accounts are something of a given these days. But as a general safety reminder, anytime you're connecting with new people entirely online, you should be using a throwaway email address that does not track back to your real identity. There are wackos and clever identity thieves everywhere online, and in the 21st century, an anonymous email is like a warm blanket. Everybody ought to have one. Now, I warned at the beginning of this episode that this was going to be fucking jumbo-sized, and I am delivering on that, but I do need to keep it from being ridiculous-sized. So some of the other topics I was going to cover under the heading of BDSM Basics are going to have to wait for another episode in a couple of weeks. I think I covered a good bit of the really critical stuff, but I mean, there's just the basics of a topic as broad as BDSM. Even the basics are just kind of fucking expansive. And I realized as I was prepping this episode and took extra time and made it what's going to be probably twice as long as the average episode, it's still not enough for the basics. Some of the stuff remaining to be covered is what you can expect at a play party, how to negotiate a kinky scene, especially how to introduce kink into an existing relationship, and that stuff, along with other stuff, will be covered in BDSM Basics Part 2 in the next few weeks. In fact, I think I'm going to combine that with a listener mail, as long as you guys have some kink-related questions and feedback to be included with it. So drop me an email or post on the website if there's anything in the realm of BDSM or kink that you'd specifically like to hear about on BDSM Basics Part 2. I'll do my best to cover everything you guys request. I do tend to run off at the mouth sometimes, but this is a lot of important stuff, and I want to give every aspect the coverage that it deserves. There will be plenty of shows in the future with much more detailed info on topics such as bondage, spanking, sensory deprivation, and many other examples of the wonderful toppings available at the Sunday bar. For now, I'm going to get Shara on the air. I know she's been looking forward to this episode for a while, and I think I could probably make her blush for 30-40 minutes straight if I had to take the time to. And now it's time to welcome Shara to the show that she's been waiting for.
That I've been waiting for? There you go. See, we're not even on how long, and I'm already blushing. This is terrible.
You know, I have this spirit that I'm always trying to break my record at how fast I make you blush, but now I need a fucking guy with a stopwatch. I think I got to give up on it.
I think you do too.
And just declare it instant.
I'm sorry. I try so hard to go, okay. I even prepared myself. I went on and...
You're so cute when you fail.
Okay. Well, Happy New Year to everybody.
Yes, absolutely. Happy New Year to the entire audience. So this is the BDSM episode. Now, this time I let you listen to, because this is kind of a broad topic and you know, a lot of different flavors of McNuggets in there. So I wanted you to see what I actually talked about instead of just trying to come at it from the aspect of being ready to talk about BDSM in general.
And while it was long, I think that it's important to note that...
Thank you.
I think it's important to note that it has to be a long episode.
You know what? You know what I think we need to do?
Quit looking around.
Where's my hotel bell?
Oh, I don't know.
Where is it?
I don't know.
Because I bet that the listeners would love to have me have that bell here and ring it every time I see you blush.
There you go.
Let's see how this works out.
No, I think that would be too loud for their ears.
I think this is going to be awesome.
I know that two women out there that listen to our episodes all the time would agree with me that that's just too long. They would support me on that. It's too loud for their ears.
They'll be fine. Honestly, I believe they wouldn't support you because I think they're going to enjoy this.
Moving on.
Oh.
Darn it.
This is going to be awesome.
For who? You?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I just want to stress that.
Well, and thousands of other people as well. Take one for the team.
Oh, I think I do take one for the team. More often than people know. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is in your mentioning of BDSM, a lot of people wonder, how do I meet somebody like that? And I know that you spoke about the munches and things like that. It's interesting how we met. I had a friend who told me to go check out your profile on an adult site, and she told you about me, and we ended up meeting through there.
And then what happened on our first date?
Okay, now let's... We don't want to make this episode too long. So, seriously, it was a lot of fun. And I walked in and saw you, and although I knew what you looked like, it was immediate for me that I, began to melt and get wet at the same time. So, anyway, back to the... Okay. I want to take the bell away. May I?
I will grant you, because I am merciful, that I will not always use this bell in the future, but I'm using it today.
Well, Let me start with this. Blushing while listening to this episode, not just because I love your sensual voice, but because, well, let's say one of the things you talked about was my punishment.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so let's talk about punishment.
Yeah.
Discipline is something that a lot of people don't do at all.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if they're more casual players, they might not get into anything actually involving discipline. And
Except for fun during the play, maybe.
Well, yes. Yeah. Well, that's more like fantasy discipline.
Correct.
That's not actual behavior correction.
Sometimes I wish we could do more of the fantasy discipline than, even though I know you don't have to, even though I know you don't have to discipline me very often. I hate when you have to discipline me, which I think you said.
And what's that? That's a motivation not to break the rules, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
All righty then. So everything's working the way it's supposed to is what you're saying.
Darn it all, yes.
Okay.
Oh, I hate that bell. Oh, okay. So, were you done? Or now you see you're going to make me lose track.
No. Well, we were talking about punishment. I tend to recommend for people who are starting out not to mix whatever you're doing for punishment with whatever you're doing for pleasure.
And I agree, because it could be a very mixed signal for the submissive.
And you have experienced that yourself in
yes,
the past, right?
Yes, I have. And I'm here to say that as a submissive, if you are getting punished by your dominant and it's extreme and you feel that it might be inappropriate, much like I have a pink mafia group that I meet with, I think that you ought to make sure that you're out there meeting with people that you can, check this out with. And because I think it's important for them to know, if you're new into the lifestyle, that it is very important, if you're getting punished, that it's appropriate. And what I mean by that is there are some very strong dominants out there that know what they're doing and the punishment is appropriate. But there are other dominants out there that take it to an edge that is inappropriate. And a new submissive might not know what's appropriate and what is not. She's going to think that it's okay, or he, as a submissive, might think that it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you have to be careful.
During sex or anything else in life, if you feel like something is not right, you've got to do or say something about it. But some dominance can be very intimidating. And the BDSM community is a community like any other. There are great people. There are a whole lot of great people, but there are also whack jobs and assholes and people that just don't play safe.
Right. And they're out there, not just in the kinkster world, but life in general. I'm just saying that as a submissive, if you feel it's not right for you, then you need to tell the dominant that. And if you see that it's just too much, then maybe he's not the right dominant for you. I obviously have gone through a few dominants, and I now have the right one. So for me...
Really? How many have you gone through?
Well,
Never get around to asking that question. Although I'm kind of violating my own rule about asking numbers questions, but for you, it's just so I can see that.
I knew it. Darn it. It was all part of that, wasn't it? It was the bell ringing. Okay. So one of the things...
Excuse me, ma'am. You've been set up.
Yes, I have. For me, one of the dominants that I was very controlling, extremely controlling. And at the time, I thought it was all appropriate. I had submissive friends who said that he was not appropriate. And in fact, you met him and said, this is not appropriate. And you kind of stepped in and saved me, basically. And for some people, it might be okay. But for me, it wasn't.
Well, actually, something that I think is important to say on that note. I do tend, for all my cynicism, I refer to myself as being a cynical idealist. I can envision the ideal, but I am too realistic to think we might ever actually get there. But in an ideal society or an ideal BDSM community, I believe, and I know a lot of dominants agree with me on this, that it is basically a community responsibility to look after submissives. Mm-hmm. And I have seen mistreatment of submissives in the past, and I have stepped in because I kind of, I got that fucking knight in shining armor complex anyway, but, I felt it was my responsibility to do something about it. You can't profess to be a dominant and be serious about the carrot feeding of submissives and just walk past something like that and not take action.
It was also the fact that every time I went to move forward and I'd find somebody that I was very interested in, he always seemed to say, no, this is not the right one for you. And then, interestingly enough, we were in New York and we met up with his current submissive, and he wanted to say no to, a very well-known gentleman, dominant, stepped up and wanted him and his submissive to play with me and wanted to do the tails with me. And I was like, sounded good to me. He wanted to say no. And his submissive said, you know what? This is an opportunity for her. So it was very difficult for him. And for me, it was a moment that changed my life, because when we were all done and I realized how this dominant and his submissive were with me while we were in public, he did things to me that changed me to the point that I realized I was in the wrong relationship. It was okay for him to oversee me, but you can only go so far with that. You have to have the right dominant overseeing you. So there are submissives, when you think you're not new anymore, you still may be new. It takes a long time to understand the lifestyle and to get connected with the right people. So what I'm saying is I was in it already for a couple of years and I thought I knew a lot, and I didn't. So you may wonder, is this right or is it not right? There are plenty of other people out there to question that with.
I'll even go a step farther. You know, if anybody ever has something going on with them that they're not quite sure if it's kosher or not, write to us about it. Right. Nobody's ever going to hear your name, but you know, we will provide a second opinion.
Right. Absolutely. I'd be glad to help out for a submissive too if you're not sure. You know, I have a wide group of submissive friends out there, and I could take it anonymously to my group and ask for some opinions and see what we come back with. And you've helped a lot of my submissive friends in a lot of different areas. So I thank you for that, because it really is important for you to know that there's people out there that are safe. As a new submissive, it's really important to know that you can go out there, especially if you're just starting to dabble in it, you know, get yourself acquainted with it. You want to make sure that you're in with the right people.
When we do the second part of this episode, that's one of the things we'll be talking about, you know, trying to bring, if you're interested, bringing BDSM into an existing relationship, or looking for a new playmate when you've never done BDSM before. That was something, you know, I just didn't want to make, that's a subject in itself that needs to get some, you know, some careful attention.
And
so
you're right.
I didn't want to try to cram it in at the end of this episode.
Right. And I want to say this one thing before we move on to the next subject is, when I first got into it, I was so excited about it because it opened up a whole bunch of new horizons for me, as you kind of mentioned on there. It awakens a whole new part of your body. And, but you have to.
We call that releasing the inner slut.
I knew the bell was going to ring. I could feel my cheeks. Anyway, that being said, I just want to tell them that while you're getting excited, you still want to make sure that you're turning to the right people, because that's when mistakes can happen on the part of the submissive. So that's all on that subject.
All right. Now, I was talking a little bit about having a rule about collars for BDSM play. Oh, look at, Now the cause for that ring of the bell, I will share with you. She came over, and, you know, we're kind of on a tight schedule today. And, you know, so she was here. She was a little bit late getting here. So she sat down to listen to what had been recorded for the episode pretty much right away. And she forgot to go get her collar. And then I just let it fly because I knew what she was doing over listening to the episode. And then when we got to the part about the collar, she jumped up out of her chair. I mean, I could hear the chair hit the wall behind the desk. She jumped up out of her chair and ran to get her collar and could not even look me in the eye. She did it herself. I'm so proud of you, baby.
You know why? I'm looking at the recording, and I'm looking at where, you know, it turned really red there, and I could tell it's because of my laughing so hard at myself. Shame on me.
But as far as, and I'm looking not just for your personal experience, but I know you know a buttload of other submissives. Half a metric fuck ton, I think, is the official measurement. But you know a lot of other submissives. Is the collar as symbolic to submissives as it is to most dominants? Absolutely.
It means a lot. And part of what you talked about were the contracts.
Yes.
That a master and a submissive have. And while you said they don't hold up in court, if you truly are a submissive, you take that with sincerity and you want to respect your master. So everything that he writes into that contract. Now, not all dominants and submissives have contracts, but if you have one, you'll find that you take it seriously. And
oh yeah, well, it becomes. I mean, because you imbue it with the power to be so, it becomes the foundation of your relationship, basically the core of your relationship.
Right. And one of the other things that I think is most touching for myself and other submissives is when the master deems you worthy to ask you to wear his collar. When you brought me over to pick out the collar, you had one already here, but you wanted me to have my own collar.
Right.
So that meant a lot to me, and I've never forgotten the moment, and I will always treasure that moment. But I don't take wearing the collar lightly.
You forget the collar once in a while, though, don't you?
No, I don't forget it per se. I knew that you wanted to get this out to the listeners because, there have been a few that have asked you, hey, when's it coming out?
So what you're saying is you made the calculated decision to defy me because you thought that was what I really wanted?
Oh, no, not to defy you.
Because that seems to be what you're saying.
No, I just wanted to please you by immediately getting to listening to this immediately. But
what really pleases me, right?
Yes.
And what's that?
Putting on the collar first.
That's right.
Okay. So
okay.
I think I'll just move on to the next subject that I wrote a note on was stressing as a submissive that it's okay to let the dom know you have reached your limit. You mentioned that and that it could cause problems in the relationship if they don't.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've watched it go on around me.
Right. And not only is that true, but also the submissive may become angry at the dominant for not realizing that you're not paying attention to what her limit is. But if you don't say yellow or red, hopefully it's yellow first, then he doesn't know that you're at your limit. But what I'm saying is that after they're done playing, she survived it. She did okay with it. But she might find
you
that
should use words like survived. I mean, we're trying to introduce people to BDSM. They're going to be thinking we're filming fucking Saw 4 over here.
You're right. Sorry. What I mean is for some, they could be like grabbing on to the chains or if the cuffs, if they're, and they're okay. But I mean, like everybody has their own limit. Some have very, very soft limits and some are, can go very extreme. So
how many limits was it that you have? Was that 7?
Okay.
I'm just teasing her. I don't know the actual number, but I wanted one of those.
I know. And you just know how to bring that out. But my point is that a dominant's not necessarily going to know, even through conversation with the submissive, exactly what her limits are if she doesn't utilize the safety words. And if you don't use them, and let's say that, I'll use you and I as an example. When we first met and we talked about it and we had the safety word, I didn't have to use the safety word, but let's say I did, but I chose not to. Then my concern would be I would get angry with you later because I went ahead and let you do whatever it was that you chose to do to me and never yelled out, say yellow, as in, okay, it's getting close to my limit. I might actually be angry with the dominant later.
Well, right. And that would be a natural reaction, but it's basically a feedback loop of poor communication.
Right. But
because the dominant is, and this is important for the subs to understand, the dominant is in the position that basically your two jobs as a submissive are to do as you're told, when you're in the middle of play, to do as you're told and to tell us when it's almost too much.
Right.
Those are the two jobs. So if you're not doing both of those jobs, you're not even playing.
Exactly. And my point is that anger can build up over time and really ruin the relationship, like you mentioned.
Oh, I would imagine. And I've seen it. I've seen it grenade relationships fairly quickly. I've never watched it, the long way, but I'm sure it happens in plenty of cases.
Well, the one dominant that I told you about that was kind of overseeing me when we would play, I know that some anger built up in me because I did let him know, but he'd still continue to push my limit. So that being said, I think it's important for a submissive to always let them know when you're at your limit. Let them know before you get too far,
Right, and your dominant appreciates it. No submissive will ever please a dominant by withholding information. That's an easy one. So any activity that falls under that category, such as not using your safe word.
Right.
Not using your safe word is bad. Not only does it get you play that you don't want, it's annoying the person that you're playing with, or if they ever find out about it. They would be irritated about it.
And also one of them that you used with me was when you did group play, whether it's just one other person or two other people. Before we played with other people, you always gave me a safe word for you and I to have so that if I was uncomfortable, not just about pain, But was I becoming uncomfortable? Maybe.
Right. Actually, I'm so glad you brought that up because I did the topic of safe words, but that completely slipped my mind. If you are in a group play situation, you need to have 2 layers of safe words. You need one safe word, which is your normal, this play is too much, untie me, or that hurts too badly, or whatever. Your standard safe word still applies just like it always does. But you need to have another safe word with your partner so that if one of you feels that you just need to get out of the room or, you need a graceful exit from a situation, it's a different kind of a safety word.
Right.
So you're communicating a different thing to your playmate.
And I think I mentioned this in one of our previous episodes, but you were great with me. You came up to me and you'd whisper in my ear, make sure I was okay and everything. But I think it's important for the submissives out there to know that you should have, another set of safe words between you and your dominant if you're going to play with other people, whether it's 1, 2, 3, whatever, or going into a play area where there's a whole group of people. Like I was in New York, I had safety words for myself.
Right, fetish club.
Yes, fetish club.
Yes, that's what we like to call those. Even though you don't like to say it.
I didn't say I didn't like to say it.
How many fetish clubs you been to?
A couple.
I know. I've been to a couple too.
Yes.
I'm just fucking with you.
I know you are. It's okay. I can handle it.
Because
I'm on this side and they can't see my face.
This might have been more than a couple play parties. But, So, nothing I'm ashamed of, but it's not quite public record.
Well, my favorite one was in New York, I have to admit, because having that done to me and turning around when he came up to me and said, do you know how many people you made come just from your voice and your coming? And I said, no. And then when he took the blinds off of me and I turned around, there was this whole room of people behind. I mean, over 60 people. I blushed. Can you imagine that? That I blushed?
Can I imagine that? No, God, what would that even look like?
Yes, what would that look like? But it was fun, I have to admit. It was fun.
Well, you had a pretty good reaction to that party we were at when, your little pocket rocket friend asked if she could flog you, and she beat your ass through several orgasms, if I recall correctly. That was a pretty good show that night. You were loud.
Yes, well, she's a lot of fun. She's my favorite, one of my favorites, I have to say. She's a sweetheart.
That was fun to watch.
She's a tiny little thing, too, so she's, she is a hottie. And that flogger she had is, I think, longer than her.
It was. That was. Yeah,
and she could handle it.
Yeah, when I say a small female dominant, I mean she was like 4'11".
4'11", correct.
And I know. I think she was holding the flogger up so it wasn't dragging on the ground.
Yes, you're correct.
That was quite a set of tails on that.
She can handle it. Let me tell
you.
Oh yeah,
it was.
Just thinking about it, I don't even want to tell you what it's doing to me right now.
Yeah, if you've never seen it, watching a good flogging is almost like fuck. I don't know how to describe it. It's not like dance. It's I don't know. It's not like performance art, but it is an art. And somebody who is very good at giving a flogging doesn't just slap the submissive in the ass with a flogger over and over again. You use different parts of the body, and you change your rhythm and tempo, where you're striking, how hard. A flogger is a deceptively simple looking implement. Because it is capable of so many different things. And watching a good flogging is always a pleasure.
And it was a beautiful flogger, too.
Yes,
it's really
it was.
nice. So I think I'll have to get in touch with her and see if maybe she'll come on one of our trips with us and
Oh, that'd be
me.
fun. Yeah.
I didn't think you'd
I'd buy
object.
tickets to that again. Yeah.
Yeah, so. Next.
I love my bell.
I still want to hide it, everybody. The
You
bell.
realize that your fate, much as Frodo's fate was tied to the ring, your fate is now tied to the bell. That thing better not disappear.
Oh, darn it. Okay, next.
I did not talk much at all about subspace. I was going to, and it's an important topic, but I decided I was just going to cover it with you all together. Because, yes, I understand plenty about subspace. I'm fucking dominant. I don't know what the drapes look like,
It's unbelievable. It is unbelievable. I will never, ever, ever forget anytime I go into subspace.
And as a physiological note, subspace is partially a result of mental state, but it's also a result of all those pleasure endorphins and all the adrenaline from pain and all that shit just kind of coming together and turning into a little fucking orgasm tornado.
Right. And for me, and I don't know if it's like this for every submissive, but for me, it is literally like I step out of my body and I can see you doing something to me. I can feel it, but it is like I have left my body, and it is just unbelievable. But you have to be very careful who you do it with because, it's unbelievable. I mean, I just can't even.
We treat you girls pretty well.
Oh, I'm telling you, it is unbelievable. It's.
So, because a lot of the show is kind of aimed at people who might never have had any flat-out factual information about BDSM thrown at them before. When you first started playing the BDSM scene, was subspace something that you were introduced to by a dominant who knew what he was doing, or is it something you stumbled upon? Or was it eventually like an aha moment of like, oh, that's what you call what's been happening to me? How did you and subspace first meet?
Well, actually, it was with the dominant that was overseeing me. So I had a lot of issues with him, but not during that time frame. That was a very good time between him and I. It wasn't until after that. So that was the first time that it happened. And then after that, it wasn't until I was with you. So it's not something that is easy for me to go into subspace. It takes a long time. And I don't know if other submissives, and I'd love to hear from them out there, if it's easier for them than it was for me. I'm talking about he probably worked on me for like an hour before I actually went into subspace. And with you, it was less time.
I just showed up and I was all magic fingers.
So, but I
you know what? That's going to be the bell of truth. Because from now on, when I say some filthy fucking thing to you, and when they hear that bell, they're going to know that you're admitting it with a blush and a giggle.
So
my new bell is awesome.
It's not a new bell.
Well, it's new to the show.
It is new
I've
to the
had
show.
the thing for fucking 20
Forever.
years, but yes. Let's see. I remember where that came from. Yeah, I've had it for more than 20 years. Yeah.
So I wouldn't mind hearing from other submissives on a call-in or on the Sexual Dark Age website if they have encountered subspace and how it was for them. The other submissives in my Pink Mafia group, they have not very many of them have encountered it. Probably only 2 that I can think of besides me have encountered it.
See, that always surprises me because, I mean, maybe
I think overall,
maybe I run with a good crowd, but I am surprised that so few women are actually being effectively guided into subspace because I have never found it particularly difficult. Many of the people I consider to be close friends in the scene have never found it particularly difficult. So I think we might have an education issue. And, of course, that's something that we can do something the fuck about, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Okay,
well,
so there's going to be a subspace episode is what I'm trying to say.
And there is different levels probably of subspace. So when we're out there talking to them, when I express my subspace to the girls in my group, the submissives in my group, I tell them that literally it's like I've left my body and I can see what's going on, and it's just unbelievable. And not many have ever said that that's what it is for them. So they might be getting a different type of subspace. So I would love to hear from other submissives out there.
Yeah, you know, give us some tales of subspace. Post them on the website or email them into us.
We'll keep it confidential.
Oh, absolutely. As always, as anonymous as you feel like being. And, let's just start collecting a little bit of data from the listeners.
I'd love it.
Tell us about your experiences with subspace, submissives. Dominance, I'd be curious to hear your experiences getting submissives into subspace and about anything that you discovered may have tripped you up.
Exactly.
It's going to be Pavlovian pretty soon. I'm going to be able to ring the bell and make you blush, probably before the time we're done recording this episode.
Next.
I see you've got quite a bit of notes. Is there anything that you would like to talk about that we have not gotten to yet?
I think that a couple things. Number one, when you're going into the future episodes, I wasn't sure exactly how you're planning on doing this, but one, making sure that submissives out there, if they're not sure if they're submissive, some of them, like you mentioned in there, whether they're a switch, a top, a bottom, it's getting to know who you are. And what you're comfortable with.
And there doesn't, I throw around a lot of jargon. Of course, a lot of this episode was about, helping people understand the definitions of some of the concepts that are all very fluid parts of the lifestyle. But if you're somebody who's curious, really don't worry about labels. Go with the flow, experience sexuality, and experience kink as you would regardless. Go with the flow. Be open to new experiences, but don't ever try to make a label fit you.
Or don't let someone label you until you know what it is that you are, what you feel that you are. Because people kept trying to label me as a submissive, and I wasn't really sure that I was submissive because...
When I write all kinds of filthy shit on you with Sharpie, is that labeling you? Oh, twofer!
Okay. So, moving on.
She is nearly incapacitated. It's so adorable.
Do not let them label you, because they did try to label me. And while I am submissive, I wasn't sure whether I was submissive or a switch, because I, in my vanilla life, as we call it, have to be a boss. So for me, I have to be dominant in my business world. However, here, I like to be submissive. But that means I have to wear two different hats. And so I have to be able to...
And a lot of pairs of panties.
Oh, panties? I have to wear panties? You didn't tell me that.
Well, you don't have to, but you
okay.
often do.
Oh, and often I don't. But anyway, that being said...
My panties are all wet. I need to start carrying underwear around with me.
Oh, that bell hurts the ears, I'm sure, for your listeners.
I really find it kind of musical.
I think that the listeners might want to call in and say, that bell hurts my ears.
You know, you're begging for help where I believe you are going to get none at all.
Come on, listeners, help me.
It's my personal prediction. I'm not trying to discourage anybody, but that's my prediction.
Well, is it okay if I quickly change the subject?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay.
You're welcome.
Oh, darn it. Listener mail. I don't think we ever got back to the some of the questions that I was supposed to report back on one of them.
Oh, yes. You know, good girl for volunteering that.
I know. I really didn't want to, but...
You didn't want me to remember for you, did you?
And at least I was able to do it without the bell, because I knew that if I said something, I'd be a good girl and that would get me points. And so I didn't have to blush about that.
Okay. Yes, well, we were talking about doing a little bit of musical holes. Why don't you tell the listeners what we did?
What we did?
Yeah.
Well, we
Why
had
don't you
sex.
tell the listeners what I did to you?
We had sex.
Oh, I think our listeners,
You surprised
our
me.
audience, I think expects a little fucking more than that.
You surprised me. You, number one, didn't tell me when we were going to be doing this.
What, I surprised you how?
Well, first of all, you had candles lit and told me to come to the bedroom. I went to the bedroom and you told me to get on my knees on the bed on all fours. And by
the way, a sincere tip for all the guys out there: don't do surprise anal unless you are absolutely sure she's cool with it.
Oh yes, please.
Yeah, no anal surprise for introducing a woman to it, but some people like it more than others, and you know. Anyway, continue.
Okay, I knew that was coming. So, then you, of course, played with me a little bit, and my clothes were already off, and then decided to get the condom out, and decided to put it in my ass first, and it was a surprise for me. And,
she's working so hard at not blushing.
And after a while, you took the condom off, and you put it into my pussy.
What did you say to me right before I did that?
I don't recall.
You don't remember what I asked you?
No.
I bet you remember.
I don't think so. Do you want to help me?
You know what? I'll help you later. All right. I'll put that one in my pocket.
Okay. I'm sorry that I'm turning pink so often today.
It's not any different than any other day, but now we have the bell to commemorate it, see?
Yes, it makes it more awareness for me as well. So.
Oh, I'm sure it does.
Yes.
You know what? That just might have been part of the plan.
Oh, really? You and your plans, they're kind of killing me.
Because it might make you more embarrassed and more likely to blush.
Oh, that's working.
Yes.
That's working.
It's a multi-purpose addition to the show.
So, as a report back, I just want to say it was great. And I do like the fact that you do it all in safety.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I know, but for all those out there that wanted to know, it was good, even with the safety, because some people talk about no safety there, and I definitely think that it should always have its safety. Condom for the ass and before you move to the other holes. And it was good.
Yeah, that was kind of cool. You were so wet.
Wait, I'm always wet.
You're not always dripping, though.
Well, okay. But quite often, I am. More than not. That's why I have to wear underwear. Oh. Okay, next. Was there any other?
I could get you some ShamWow panty liners made up if you want.
Oh, no, those would just, I think, be uncomfortable.
Oh, no, we can put a layer of silk on them or something. ShamWow panty liners for women with overactive pussies. God, I could see that. If
I could see that being a big
if,
seller.
You know, I don't have awesome graphic design chops. If anybody's able to, whip up something entertaining and visual for that.
Oh, no, here we go. The gentleman that did Dildo World for us.
Oh yeah, Jeff. If you got something to whip up, I just don't have the energy to go after it myself. So I'll
I can
throw
see
the
him now
request out
taking
there to the
pictures
audience.
of. I can see him now taking pictures of the Shamu, and then there we go.
ShamWow panty
ShamWow.
liners for women with overactive pussies.
Yep.
Should have invented those. Wow, like 5 minutes after the ShamWow. Of course, not everybody knows somebody like you.
Okay, next. Is that it?
Yeah, I think it probably is about time to have some mercy on Shara here.
Sure. It's been a long. How long has this we've been talking? A half hour?
Oh, yeah, over a half hour.
Longest half hour ever. Ever.
Yeah, but you had fun, didn't you?
I always have fun when I'm talking with you.
As you heard, I invited the listeners to shoot especially any BDSM or kink related questions or topics they'd like to hear about over the course of the next couple of weeks. While I'm getting together the next part of what has become the BDSM Basics series. Because it's just, I gave it a fucking Viking try to try and cover it all in one episode, but even the stuff, when I water it all down to just the absolute fundamental information, I gotta, I'm putting 40 pounds of shit in a 5-pound bag.
Well, and I also think that you'll hear from other listeners out there and some of their experiences, and then that will expand even more. And I don't think BDSM is something that you can do in one episode or even 3. I think BDSM, you might have to break it into several, maybe take a break in between, but...
Oh, absolutely. I didn't want to imply it was going to be, every episode from now till I think it's done. But,
well, that would be forever.
We will do, I want to do a combination listener mail and the last part of the BDSM Basics thing. So I think that'll be a good way to wrap up the start of it, because there are still lots of other things we got to talk about.
Oh, there is.
Sex laws and politics, which will be a festive
be a
episode. Those of you who've been looking for a tirade just might have something like what you're looking for. I take no position on political issues, but I'm just generally pissed off at Washington because it doesn't work. And I can explain to you many reasons and examples of why.
Well, I have so many comments on that one. I'm just going to behave myself this episode.
Yep, yeah, no issues discussion on the show. Politics divide us. We can all get together on talking about how the system is fucked. I will not talk about political issues unless there's something that directly relates to sex, because then, well, they're pissing on my front lawn.
How dare they?
I know. Electric grass. That would be awesome. Why?
I don't know. Something else went through my head, I guess. I just, I don't know.
Electric grass.
No. I don't think it was that. I don't know. Okay.
Pissing on the front lawn?
No, I don't. Let's.
We're going to figure it out here, so you might as well just come out with your hands up.
Well, I think that, we're at the end of your episode, and I wouldn't want to take away from them enjoying themselves, whatever it is in the evening.
I'll tell you what. In honor of the BDSM episode, I will agree to give you a pass on my line of questioning if you beg me for it.
If I beg you for it?
And remember, you're trying to set a good example.
Okay. Master, could we please not discuss this right now?
Yes, that'll work fine.
Okay, thank you. I think I have to go put more deodorant on and things like that now.
See, as I was talking about earlier, it is not a matter of having total control over everything. It is a matter of having the right to seize a moment and make it something really, really special. The blush plus the eyes of death. How did you even do that?
I gave the eyes of death, really?
Oh, that was the eyes of death for a second.
Oh.
I almost melted and shit.
I'll have to remember that. Well, I just want to thank all the listeners out there before I leave for you to finish doing all the editing, for listening in 2010 and hoping that 2011 will be as much enjoyment for them as I'm looking forward to these episodes. And I thank them because it's brought a whole new world out there for a lot of people that didn't know where to turn or who to turn to. So I, again, thank you for bringing the podcast to life. And I hope that we can, continue to help people grow in their area of sexuality.
I hope so too. I think it's going to be a good year.
I think so too. I have a good feeling about it.
Yeah, I got some cool crap in the works. Whether it works out or not, it's fun to be working on it. So, yeah, I think we're going to have some fun in 2011.
I think so too. So, thank you, everybody.
All right, well, thanks for joining us, baby. And I am going to wrap up the show. Last but not least, oh, wait, no, you're not going anywhere yet. Hang on.
Oh.
I almost let you go before we talked about bondage porn. That would have been...
What are we going to talk about bondage porn?
Well, as the resident expert, I figured you might have some suggestions for the listeners on where they can get some safe bondage porn. Now, I will say, there is... the internet is a business model. There's a phrase that there's no such thing as actually free porn on the internet. The porn industry is going to make some attempt to make some money off you if they're delivering you any product of any value. There are sites that are called link lists that have links to all kinds of different porn sites. If you want some quick videos, the business model is kind of fucked up. And, as an adult webmaster, I don't necessarily support them, but because at the moment, they happen to be the best option for a wide selection of free porn videos that vary in length from a couple of minutes to, some people post occasionally stuff that's like an hour and a half long. But a lot of them are in the range of like 5 to 10 minutes. But there is a price to pay for all that. Sites like TubeKitty, RedTube, and those are two of the bigger ones. I have never gotten anything malicious popping up from clicking through their videos, but you don't get free porn without at least giving somebody the opportunity to make some money off you. So a lot of times when you pop up the windows, there'll be a chat window that you got to close out, or it'll do a pop under. Live Jasmine webcams is probably the most common pop under out there.
And I always tell people,
operation,
do not click on the chat windows accidentally. Be careful.
Yeah, be careful to only click on the X, just like anything else on the internet. So the good news is there's a fuckload of free porn out there. The bad news is, yes, you do have to deal with some pop-ups and shit like that, but
the ones that you don't, the one for newbies, and I brought the site up before, is kink.com, because if you go to the bottom of it, it says free, and you click on the very first section there, and you can get just about any kind of, like there's the upper floor, which is, usually a lot of submissives and group play.
Kink.com is a premium site. Actually, it's a premium site network.
And you won't get the pop-ups with
so,
kink.com.
Yeah, you're going to the pay site. So instead of having advertising popped up by a pay site, you're just going to the pay site to look at their free samples instead of using an intermediary.
Now, the downfall on that is it's not going to be like an hour-long video, but people like me, I don't need hour-long video.
Most of the promotional clips are, what's that?
I said people like me don't need hour videos.
You realize there are like 8 people like you, right?
Well, I'm here to help. I'm happy that I am who I am. I'll tell you that. I'm happy that
I wasn't complaining, but I'm just saying.
I'm not complaining either. I mean, really, until I got into this lifestyle, I don't think I really understood my sexuality until I actually got into the lifestyle, which was a good thing for me. So, kink.com, but whatever anybody, if you're new out there and you're going to porn sites, make sure you have some kind of virus scan on your system so that you're protected against those accidental pop-ups. But immediately, kink.com, I've never had any pop-ups, and so that worked for me in the beginning. And I was advised to go there from somebody that I knew very well and trusted, and I've never regretted it. Not once. I'll take that one because you know what? It's bringing back some really good
and again, just because
moments.
It's the bondage show, show me your titties.
Okay.
Good girl. Are my hands cold?
No, not at all, but that could be because I'm feeling really hot right now.
Oh, really? Is that right?
It is. So, okay, now can I leave?
What's that?
May I leave now, Master, please?
Yes, absolutely.
I said that wrong. Master, may I please leave now?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. I
You were close enough the second time now.
I know, when I say it that way, I
But
feel
don't
like I'm
you
putting them
guys, if they volunteer to be slaves, don't you let them slack. You make them say it right. Because if they're not saying it right, all they're doing is trying to see if they can get away with it.
And I'm here to say that I've tried that a few times to get away with it.
Oh, I know.
I know. But
A
you don't
few?
let me.
Oh, Madame, don't underestimate yourself.
I know one thing. I do not like facing the wall. Okay. I hate it. Always have. And so therefore, I try really hard to be a good girl.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us as always.
Thank you for having me.
Go ahead and run along. I'm going to finish the show up and then,
Okay.
stick around.
Oh, stick around. Okay.
Yeah, I got plans for you.
All right. Okay. Sounds like a fun evening. Bye, everybody.
All right, so a little bit more on porn. There's a tremendous amount of BDSM porn out there, but like all porn, it is edited for your entertainment, no matter how extreme it looks on screen. And if you go to some of the sites that we were just mentioning, RedTube, not so much. They are more, they got a wide variety of stuff, but a lot of it's fairly vanilla. They're not real heavy on fetish and bondage stuff. Tube Kitty has got an ass load of movies. Just search for either submissive or bondage or whatnot. They generally have several thousand results. So if you're willing to deal with some pop-ups and closing some chat windows, you get absolutely free, reasonably high quality porn movies that are a whole lot of different scenes and a whole lot of different fetishes and femdom and male dom and male sub. Actually, for as uncommon as female dominants are in the lifestyle, half the fucking bondage porn out there is all femdom porn. And that's because there's a demand for it. Just let that be a note of encouragement to any of you girls that have been eyeing a paddle. Remember, though, no matter how extreme porn looks on screen, the actors are playing out a fantasy scene, and the submissives are actors, and they still always retain the right to say stop. The parts with the subs saying ropes are too tight and having someone loosen them, or that an arm or foot is starting to go numb and needs to be released, those are all edited out. They're still there. They happen in everybody's playtime. They just don't make it in the final cut because porn is entertainment made by people who are selling fantasy. The submissive actors either know exactly what's going to be done to them beforehand, or they've thoroughly discussed limits with the dominant, allowing the play to look spontaneous by being spontaneous, all the while keeping everything within the sub's comfort zone. Also remember that a lot of the suspension and bondage positions you see on the screen are not things that should be done for any extended period of time. The human body is a resilient thing, but it is breakable. No matter what kind of play you're into, the safety of the submissive has to be the overriding concern. In fact, it's probably better not to try anything like suspension at all until you're quite familiar with other types of bondage. That's definitely one of those crawl before you can walk, before you can steal somebody's bike type scenarios. So the next time you're watching some bondage porn, which is going to be pretty soon if you do your homework, remember that all the crying and begging and humiliation and bondage and beatings are all part of exactly what the submissive signed up for in the first place. She knew what she was getting into. She's playing a part. Some people really do like it that way. They enjoy stepping inside of a living, breathing fantasy. Nobody's actually doing anything against their will, and the submissive can always say stop. Remember especially that some of them did say stop, but that was edited out. It's cool that a lot of producers add a clip to the end of even short videos with the dom or the director talking to the submissive about what they thought of the experience and whether they enjoyed themselves. The girls universally say that they absolutely loved it, and they say it enthusiastically, and the reason for that is that the scene was properly prepared. These people are not filming documentaries of how to practice BDSM, they're filming entertainment. But it is always nice to have a producer take the time to peel back the curtain and show us that the scene behind the scene is actually being done right. And your homework for this episode, should you choose to accept the challenge, is to check out some BDSM porn online and see if anything you watch lights your fire. You don't need to do anything about it. You don't need to talk to anybody about it. But this assignment is just about taking a private look, just you and, well, possibly your hand, into whatever kinky desires you might or might not have. In closing, I'd like to underline that there is no typical in BDSM, which means that you'll fit in just fine if you decide to. If you like being told what to do in bed, you might want to take a whack at officially playing the submissive. Conversely, if you like having your instructions followed, the role of a dom might fit you pretty well. I've tried like hell to provide a complete and balanced view of some of the root concepts of BDSM, but I'll have to rely on you guys to tell me if I've succeeded or not. In any event, I hope I've managed to satisfy some of the curiosities I've been hearing about and maybe create some new ones. The dom-sub dynamic already exists in a lot of vanilla relationships, even if it's not a part of sex play. We are animals who have natural tendencies that lead us in the direction of dominance and submission. and those tendencies will make themselves known whether we're aware of it or not. Submissives will naturally seek out dominance, and vice versa. That's not just sex, that's the species. We have visceral urges, and by exploring them in a safe, sane, and consensual, or at least risk-aware fashion, we're able to connect with a primal side of ourselves that usually has to remain silent and invisible to get us through the day in the sexual dark age. I don't suggest anyone become a slave to their primal desires. In a civilized world, it's fucking inconvenient and basically unmanageable. But I urge you to take a look at your primal desires, right in the eye, to see what they might be able to teach you about yourself. Even jumbo-sized episodes must come to an end, so here we are again. Fuck, this was long. Let me know if it was too long, but believe me, I know it was long. Thanks as always for listening, and if you're a new member of the audience, I strongly suggest you go back to the beginning and listen to the early episodes so you can catch up with the rest of us. Please feel free to join in the conversation by posting totally anonymously on sexualdarkage.com, either in reply to any relevant post or by scribbling on the bathroom wall. You can also email jvaltheros@gmail.com or call into the listener line at 517-376-3116. I want your questions about kink, and anything that falls under the basics will be covered a couple episodes from now. Shara and I can always be found on Facebook and Twitter through links on sexualdarkage.com, and if you have iTunes, please take the time to give us a good rating and review. It will boost our position in iTunes and get us out in front of more audience. Until next time, this be me, JV Altheros, reminding you that that's your fucking bowl of ice cream.